is coming their way, I commend this bill to the House.
Jacinda Ardern.
Mr. Speaker, I want to start today with a very, very simple question for this House, and that is, who are we here to represent? I often hear a sop in this House that young people are our future, that we must invest in our young people, that we need to give young people the best start in life, and perhaps the most ironic statement of all, that young people need a voice. Well, I really question, Mr. Speaker, what kind of voice we have given young people over the past 2.5 years. And if I were to do a very quick review, it would probably cover the fact that this government has eroded the chance of young people to have, for instance, the same retirement as members in this House today by suspending payments to the superannuation fund. Secondly, the kind of voice we've given young people is a government that's sliced into young people's KiwiSaver accounts. A voice via a government for whom a credible emissions trading scheme doesn't matter and put them into debt for 50 years to subsidise heavy polluters. A voice that refuses to acknowledge that eventually the next generation won't be able to afford to put oil in their cars, but this government refuses to fund an alternative. And now, to add to the list of shame, the latest voice that we've given young people is the VSM bill. A bill that will remove student services, student advocacy and student voice. A bill that received almost 5,000 submissions. Now, members in this House know that 5,000 submissions is substantial. Members in this House know that it is almost unheard of to get that many submissions on a bill. What is even more unheard of is getting 98% of submitters to agree on one thing, and that is that they don't want this bill. Students and young people did not ask for this bill. ACT asked for this bill. So what kind of voice are we giving young people in this House today? So I ask again, who are we here to represent? And secondly, why are we doing this? Well, you would have heard from the government that the reason this bill is going through is from this fallacy that somehow this bill is providing student choice. Well, don't believe me on this question. Let's go to one of the submitters. Why don't we ask an independent view of the Human Rights Commission, who, when asked whether or not the existing structure and framework we offer in New Zealand actually caused any Bill of Rights issues around freedom of association, their answer was, Mr. Robertson, a clear no. The Human Rights Commission came to this Parliament and told us that this bill, the current structure, did not pose any issue to freedom of association. So I ask again, if this bill is not about choice, what it is about? In fact, let's reflect on what the current structure does provide us. Personally, I believe that the current framework already gives students choice. And I would have thought that Tauhenere would agree with that as well, given it was National who was behind the clause that allows students to initiate their own referendum. And if it's not about choice already, then why have we already seen student unions go voluntary? We've already heard it listed. Waikato went voluntary in 1997. I joined that campus in time to watch attempts to switch back. Now, the movement was not a movement of the Vice-Chancellor, as some pundits would argue, and no matter what those out there say, I remember and I saw the cuts that occurred on that campus as a result of voluntary student membership. Those students on that campus at that time know that it was that structure that meant we saw masses cut out of student media and saw a student radio fold. You can claim whatever you like about the referendum that eventually brought Waikato back to compulsory student unionism, but ultimately that happened in 2000. They've had 10 years to switch back if they so chose, and they haven't. And why? Because it didn't work for Waikato. But what about Auckland? And I just want to acknowledge that there are a number of students from Auckland University watching from Shadows Bar this evening. And why? Because even though they've gone voluntary, there are a large number of students on that campus who do not agree what's happening here tonight. And what of the services that the Auckland University Students Association are able to provide. Well, anyone who was on campus at the rally that occurred this week will have heard from Joe McCrory, President of the Auckland University Students Association, point out that even Auckland, under this bill, will experience cuts to services. Even a student union who currently operates as a voluntary student union will experience cuts because of this bill, and to claim otherwise is a complete untruth. Let me run through it. Under the Education Compulsory Student Union Service Fees Notice 2011, there are a list of student services that AUSA and the university cannot fund. So let's run through the things that Auckland will no longer have as a consequence of this government. Orientation, student representation through AUSA Exec, which they've had since 1891. Student representation through clubs, which again they've had since 1891. Student representation from class reps, which they've had since 1968. Club grants. And the historic Ed Hillary's Tramping Club is particularly worried about what this bill will mean for them. The University Games, reorientation, Pacific Island Student Association, library services, Freshers Week, courses and careers days, the Māori Students Association, and I want to acknowledge the advocacy of the Māori Party in particular on behalf of our Māori student associations, the Student Emergency Fund, International Student Advisory Services and Pastoral Care. All of these services will not be able to be funded as a consequence of the actions of this National Act government. The House cannot tell me that this bill will not affect student services when it will impact on the ability to raise funds for them and their ability to pay for them. And the irony of all of this is that every single member in this House who went to a university experienced and enjoyed the services provided by student associations, the very services that they are now gutting. And more than that, these services represent the fibre of our university. If we want hollow institutions devoid of ideas, devoid of debate, this bill is part of that. And I am by no means the first person to make that claim. Nicky Hagar, in fact, in his book, The Hollow Men, talks about attempts to squash student unions through the VSM movement. And that's not something that should be viewed in isolation. It was never just about student services or money. What do most people think when they think about universities and campuses? I know I always saw them about advocacy on behalf of students, for students, by students. Universities have been a place of consciousness, of debate, of academic freedom, of ideas and of protest. Now, unfortunately, I joined Waikato campus at a time when Prebbles Rebels were having a resurgence, so all of those elements weren't quite as strong. But the point remains. These are not just places of learning, they're places where we grow global citizens. Students are not a brief sub-community. They have been our political consciousness, and student associations, Tau Henere, have been the backbone of that. To destroy that is to destroy something much greater than just student services. And so therein lies the answer. This bill is not about cost. You say, who cares, Tau Henere? This bill is not just about cost. It's not about choice, and it's not about freedom. It is about the opposite of all of those things. This is about removing student voice. So I ask again, who are we here to represent? Because if taking away the voice of students, if taking away the voice of young people is what you call representation, then we have failed young people yet again, and shame on you.
Before I call the member, I understand... Order! I understand this is to be a split call. Does the member want a warning bell?
No, I'm right.